الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا محمد عبده ورسوله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبع سنته إلى يوم الدين. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, we start by praising Him, seeking His aid and His forgiveness. Anyone whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides, none can misguide them. And anyone whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala misguides, none can guide them. We send an abundance of peace and salutations upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his family and his companions, and all of those who follow in his footsteps until the end of time. Brothers and sisters, just a little over a week ago, I had the blessing and opportunity to travel in Central America with one of my teachers. And the only reason why I'm mentioning that is because the Sheikh was telling us that when he was a small boy, he's a West African man, when he was a small boy, his father told him one day, you shall give da'wah in the Western Hemisphere. And he laughingly joked and said, at that time I had no clue what was beyond West Africa. He said, but subhanAllah, I never doubted my father. Even though I had no clue what he was talking about, I trusted him in what he said, and I did my absolute best to fulfill the mission that he gave me. Brothers and sisters, I start with this opening story because we have to ask ourselves, are we living with a purpose? So many of us live our lives accidentally. We live our lives haphazardly, just responding to the things that are happening in society, just responding to the things that we find, the circumstances we find ourselves in. And then when it comes to Islam, we think of it as the quick fix to everything in our lives. We look for the spiritual Ozempic, the shot that we can take that fixes everything, and then mashallah, I'm from the awliya as-salihin. I'm from the righteous, sagely people, just from that quick fix. I make that one dua or that one prayer, and I'm off and sailing. Brothers and sisters, the reality is life doesn't work that way. That in order to fulfill a life with mission, first and foremost, we need to know what our mission is. We have to turn internally. We have to see what are the gifts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. What are the things that He's placed in us that are uniquely for us. Not only the gifts that we have, but the things that we're interested in. And how is it that I can orient my life to live it in a way that's meaningful and pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If I don't have that introspection, if I don't look internally, then I'm just going to respond. And one response will lead to another response. And then in 5 and 10 years, I'm looking back and saying, subhanAllah, I had so much potential, so much that I could have done that I wasted. So much that I would have done, and Allah has blessed me, but I could have done so much more. But not only does it require us to look internally and recognize our gifts, it requires us to be humble. It requires that we know that we have very limited control in the outcomes. despite what I have in my hands, despite what Allah has blessed me with, how and which levers that I push and pull is truly dependent on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed. So how do I work with what Allah has given me with very little control to accomplish something that seems almost unimaginable? Something, as my Shaykh was telling us, that we have no ability to perceive or even conceive how it will happen. It's through that humility and understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the decreer of all things, and knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen each and every one of us for a unique mission, that we can start to do something. But brothers and sisters, what we have to do is that we have to be courageous. We have to recognize that it's going to happen only through immense difficulties and effort. That anything and everything that we accomplish is walking into the abyss of the unknown. It's walking without understanding how it's going to manifest. We have to not only recognize our gifts, but truly root ourselves in tawakkul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to root ourselves in relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and knowing that He will suffice us regardless of what actually manifests of those things. And that requires a courage, because in our modern worlds, we're used to control in every single thing. We're used to, if I want to do something, it happens when I want it, how I want it to happen. But the reality is life doesn't work that way. The reality is that I have to then put my trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and remember Him in every single step of our lives. And I have to be responsible. I have to look in the mirror and be accountable for who I am and what it is that I do. I have to recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the mission that He's given us, requires that I remember Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. That I remember Him not only on my tongue, but in my heart, but also in my actions and doing the things that I need to do to accomplish that mission that we're trying to achieve. I have to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in making dhikr of Him, in the good times and in the bad. As we know, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us, the strong believer is not the one who can win the most battles, but the one that can control themselves in the fit of rage. When things aren't happening the way that we want, when we're upset and we're frustrated, when things are perhaps going against everything that we've planned for them to happen or the way that we wanted them to go, that is when we show our faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is when we're truly courageous, relinquishing all trust over to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then we do as best we can with what we can. We have to recognize that our actions should be a scalpel and not a hammer. Our actions and our anger and our strength should be something that we use very intentionally, very thoughtfully, very specifically to accomplish that goal, and not simply responding, hammering every single thing and seeing it all as a nail. But lastly, brothers and sisters, it requires that we are wise. It requires that we are thoughtful about what it is that we have, the blessings that Allah has given us. And as the definition of wisdom is in Arabic, is putting things in their proper place. Al-wad'u shay' fi makani. Putting things in their proper place. How is it that I can use my skills? How is it that I can use the gifts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me? How is it that I can orient my life in a way in the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has inspired me to enjoy, so that I can work wisely and thoughtfully and courageously in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, striving and struggling against and with myself to be a person whom He's pleased with. Brothers and sisters, living an intentional and purposeful life is not easy. And that our true strength and our true caliber is determined through our istiqamah. A'zam al-karam al-istiqamah, as some of the awliya of the past have said. That the true miracle is our ability to be upright and consistent in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that courage, brothers and sisters, means that we have to have and rely on Allah and not only ourselves. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us a courageous, confident people that struggle against and with ourselves to determine what it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us to the best of our ability, and struggle and strive against and with ourselves to achieve that mission. Wa aqulu qawli hadha wa astaghfirullah wa lakum wa sa'il muslimin wa astaghfiru wa atubu ilayh. بسم الله إن الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعد أما بعد Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَلَائِكَتَهُ يُصَلُّونَ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا صَلُّوا عَلَيْهِ وَسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا اللهم صل وسلم وأنم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Brothers and sisters, we started off this khutbah with a story of a man who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed tremendously, but it started off with getting the advice of his elders. And if we're going to live purposeful lives, we can't think that we can do it independently. We can't think that we have been gifted all the knowledge and the wisdom of the world to choose which in those things are, but it requires that we have mentors, people that we turn back to, people that we ask their counsel, people who know us better and like we know ourselves, and they give us sincere counsel, struggling and striving to help orient us in that way, because we can't do it alone. We are limited by the extent of our knowledge and dwarfs standing on the shoulders of giants. So who are the people that we have in our circle? Who are the people that we rely on to help advise and guide us when we're trying to make decisions, to help guide and advise us when we find ourselves stuck and we're trying to figure out how it is that we're going to pivot on to the next thing? But also, brothers and sisters, we have to engage in some muhasabah. We have to engage in this internal accountability for who we are. Not just about the things that we've done, but what it is that we would like to do. If we don't make plans, how will we ever achieve or reach the place that we would like to achieve? If we don't think intentionally about what it is that we're trying to do, how will we accomplish anything? And lastly, brothers and sisters, we have to be humble and we have to be confident. We have to be people that know that ultimately, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah wa hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. We have to know that there's no might and no power except by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is our trust that we put in Him, and He is the best of people, the best of things we can put our trust in. We have to recognize, brothers and sisters, that despite the things that we'd like, despite the expectations that we have gathered from what we've seen in the world or what perhaps we've conjured up in our own minds, Allah knows what's good for us. Allah knows what it is that we can achieve. So can we put those things to the side, put them on pause, not saying that we don't have aspirations or expectations or hopes, but recognizing that what is good for us is what Allah has decreed for us. What's good for us is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in our path and our ability to. Maybe that means we need to pivot right now. Maybe that means that we put that goal a little bit further down the road and we work to figure out what it is that we can do to achieve it right now. What is the first step so that we can get there? So often do we see our brothers and sisters, they have these very lofty goals. I see the young brothers and sisters, they put the expectations on themselves of 40-year-old men at 20 years old. It takes steps. It's difficult. And ultimately at the end, it's only what Allah has decreed. But what is it that I need to do? What is it that I can do? How is it that I set up my life with the advice of my counsel, but also the support of those people around me that are going to help me on my journey? But how is it that I'm mindful of what Allah has decreed for me? And how is it that I'm going to be courageous? How can I remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as I walk and I journey and I struggle and I strive to be someone who Allah is pleased with? How is it that and what is it that I do to be someone who, despite everything that we have in our lives, the difficulties and the heartache, what is it that I do with struggling against and with the letdown and the heartbreak and the loss of expectations to work and strive to be someone Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with? And in closing, brothers and sisters, sometimes just merely striving is enough. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not concerned with necessarily what we produce, but rather what it is that we do and how it is that we exhaust ourselves. So even if we don't achieve that goal, we don't reach the place that we'd hope we'd reach to, if we've struggled and strive in the mindfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as much as we can in our actions and in our hearts, then that is sufficient for us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people that have good teachers. May Allah bless and preserve all of our teachers. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people that listen to their advice and we take it humbly and sincerely. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put around us and with us good company that supports us and aids us in our journey to earn Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people that look honestly in the mirror of our hearts and recognize what it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for us, and give us the humility and the courage to struggle against ourselves and with ourselves to be people He's pleased with. وأقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله ولكم ولسائر المسلمين واستغفر واتوب إليه. Brothers and sisters, do not forget Palestine. in Sudan, in Kashmir, in the Congo, in everyone in place that may be going through difficulties in your du'as. Do not think that our du'as will not be heard by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa aqim as-salah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Straighten the lines, fill the gaps. Allahu Akbar. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.